And we are back on OpenLine. Thank you for tuning in this evening. We are talking with Clint Kelly, attorney Clint Kelly from the Kelly firm. We're talking about medical malpractice. Clint is one of the specialists in this field, and it's an important field because when something happens to you, you need to be in the hands of someone who understands the situation. This is a specialty in the legal field. One of the things that we were talking about, Clint, is, and it's a case that continues to receive headlines. You see something new about it. It seems like every few months. But we were talking about in a case, and it was a high-profile case, obviously, but the Joan Rivers case just amazes me, the kind of neglect that happened in that case, and I mean the settlement in that was amazing.
Yeah, the settlement has been deemed confidential, but there are a lot of rumors out there in the legal community. It was $75 million, and someone might say, "Holy smoke! How can it be that much?" She was earning well over $3 million a year, even at her advanced age, and was probably worth that much. But the facts are what's most disturbing, because she went in and had what they call an esophageal dilatation, where they just pass a scope down your esophagus and they stretch it to help you swallow. And instead of doing this in the hospital, which is where it should have been done at her age, this outpatient clinic decided, we're going to go ahead and take this on. And as the procedure is taking place, her doctor is taking selfies of herself and Joan while Joan's under anesthesia. None of the advanced life support equipment's out. There's nothing to deal with the 911 situation. Well, sure enough, it happened. She goes into cardiac arrest. They try some CPR, and it was just kind of ham-handed, failed. They weren't prepared for it at all. They didn't get her over to the hospital immediately like they were supposed to. So by the time they get her over to the hospital, even the hospital's not prepared because they didn't know about this, and then she dies. And it was just the whole thing was botched. And it seems like every 3 months we get fed another little detail. And I told you off air that one of the reasons I knew from the beginning this was going to be a huge case, they fired the director of the outpatient clinic within a month of this happening. They never fire anybody during the course of a lawsuit. So it tells you just how gross the negligence was in that case. And if it can happen to Joan Rivers, it can happen to anybody.
Right. We are going to go back to our lines right now. Norman is on the line with us. Norman, thank you for calling in this evening. Do you have a question or a comment for Clint?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me all right up there?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we had a case with my wife where we actually took her around. She got a lump there on her breast. It was a slightly, large one. And we took her around and got a couple opinions on it. They didn't think it was going to turn into much, and then so we take her on around there, and her, the nipples actually turned black.
All right, is she lost?
She actually, had the cancer. So I'm kind of wondering, is it a case?
What's the status right now? Is she going to keep her breasts, or are they going to have to remove them?
Well, I hope so.
So you don't know yet what the treatment plan is in terms of whether she's going to retain her breasts?
No, they hadn't said. She thinks that she will be able to keep them.
Okay, well, that's a good thing. Breast cancer is...
she's all torn up because, they turn black.
Well, Norman, they can do that, and you can still survive. You can still maintain or keep your breasts if they are able to get the tissue perfused and get a blood supply going through there. But it's hard to tell, because until she has a definitive treatment plan ahead of her in terms of whether she's going to lose her breasts or not, that's a case I couldn't even tell you whether it's a lawsuit or not. It sounds like it might have been a misdiagnosis, but I just don't know enough about it.
Okay, so good advice there. So, going back to the, and thank you for calling in. We appreciate that call, Norman. Going back to the Joan Rivers situation in that case, if that had happened to just the everyday person, would you think that they would have kind of known what to do? Is that just obviously anytime someone dies in that kind of situation, what should someone do in that case at that point?
Well, one thing I did want to let Norman know. Norman called the office in the morning, asked to speak to Nurse Kathy and give her more information, because I need more to be able to make a judgment on that. But in terms of being prepared for Joan Rivers, every hospital and outpatient clinic has standards they have to follow, particularly ones that have surgery. And one of those standards is to make sure you have advanced life support systems in place so that if something happens, such as an emergency, it can be dealt with on the site. That's the whole idea, is being able to manage something on an outpatient basis as serious as perhaps someone having cardiac arrest, and then having a plan in place to get that patient to the hospital for more emergent care. If you're not prepared for that and you're having surgeries or other types of procedures that involve surgery at your clinic, then by definition you're basically acting negligently, because it's going to happen. And if you're not prepared for it, the patient could die. That's simple.
One thing we've talked about in the past is you've said it's more about doctors failing to take defensive measures often is the situation. So kind of expound on that.
Sure. Defensive medicine is basically a term for the doctors running tests and other types of procedures to make sure that serious conditions are ruled out, life-threatening conditions are ruled out. They call it defensive medicine. Defensive medicine saves lives. It may cost more money, but it saves lives, because if you're not defensive and you're not thinking to rule out life-threatening or serious conditions, then somebody may have it and die. For example, if somebody comes in with chest pain, you want to make sure a heart attack's being ruled out. That means having an EKG done, having blood tests done to determine whether there's markers for a heart attack. If you come in, I think we got called earlier by one of the people here was talking about a stroke. I think it was Gregory saying being dealt with a stroke. If you have symptoms suggestive of a stroke, have a CT scan of the brain. CT scan of the brain can detect stroke damage. You want to rule that out before you just assume it's a headache. You see what I mean?
Right.
That's what defensive medicine is. And unfortunately, the term has gotten a bad rap because people have been told, oh, well, we can't have defensive medicine, it's too expensive. Well, if you're not having defensive medicine, what good is the medicine?
Right.
If they're not doing what they need to do to rule out serious life-threatening conditions, what good is to have the doctor? If it's me, I want the most defensive medicine you can have, because I want to make sure I'm not dying from something.
Well, and and again, I always like to remind people as they are tuning in, though, the number you see on your screen, the 737-7587 is the number to call, because we always like to say this is your forum when you have those questions, when you have those comments about anything to do with medical malpractice. Did you receive the wrong treatment? Did a friend or a family member receive that wrong treatment, or get the wrong prescription, or something was prescribed wrong? All those kinds of questions. We like to be your forum so that you can call in during the show this evening. But how prepared should someone be? Because a lot of times you go to the doctor and you think, they know what they're doing, so I'm just going to go in and say, here's the problem, let them diagnose it, let them tell me what's wrong. But more and more we're seeing you really need to kind of, as the patient, you need to know a lot going in there.
Right.
What would you kind of advise people to do?
Well, the first thing, remember, is always have a family member or friend be with you at all times. It's just so important for someone to be your patient advocate. That goes for doctor's visits as well. I mean, particularly if you're going to a new doctor. Or you have a condition that may make it difficult for you to communicate your history. Make sure you do that. And then secondly, ask questions. Ask questions. Push back. And everyone, I think, has sort of a gut feeling, hey, this isn't right. I understand what the doctor's saying, but something just doesn't sound right here. Get a second opinion. That's what they're for. Second opinion can save your life. That's another thing that people can do if the care might not seem appropriate or they're not getting answers. Those are two things that I can think of that are very, very important that, like I said, can save a life.
Well, when we started, I started at the top of the show, was talking about the fact that medical negligence is the third leading cause of death in the U.S., right behind heart disease and cancer. That's death. That's just, right. There's a number of cases, I mean, just so many more cases that result in permanent injury. It doesn't even have to be permanent injury, but there's so many different cases that just kind of, branch off from there. I mean, you don't even think about that.
Yeah, the best estimates that we have are that there are twice as many injuries as there are deaths. So you can do the numbers. If 250,000 people are dying and there's twice as many of that people who are being injured, then, like I said, you've got the population of Nashville. And the reason why these are happening in greater numbers is because our population is increasing. The supply of healthcare providers is remaining fairly stable, although more and more of the care is being dumped down on nurse practitioners, physician assistants, other types of physician extenders who are making bigger and bigger decisions. They're making, in some cases, medical decisions that were traditionally reserved for doctors. And there is assembly line medicine. And anytime you have assembly line medicine, the margin for error shrinks because there's only so much time you can spend with each patient. And so if there's a screw up, you may not detect it in time to keep from injuring somebody.
Okay, good to know. We're going to go back to the phones right now. Fran is on the line with us. Fran, we are glad that you were watching this evening. And do you have a question or a comment for Clint?
Hey, good evening. Thanks for taking my call.
Absolutely.
I just had a quick question.
Sure.
I was in ER. I went in for an issue with the leg problem. And when I was in ER, they admitted me to the hospital, and I was in there for 3 days. They didn't really have any kind of answers. They let me leave and said there wasn't anything wrong. I did, like you guys said, got the second opinion, and there was actually issues with my back and nerves, overacting nerves going on. I don't even think it would, I don't know if it will qualify as malpractice or not. I just want to know, how do I contest those bills? Because I don't feel like I should be responsible for a hospital stay. Had they ran the right tests in the beginning, it wouldn't even been necessary to be admitted.
What I would do in that situation is I would write a letter to the billing department of that particular hospital. I would send that previous hospital the results of what was found at the second hospital with the second doctor, and say that in your judgment the contract that you have for provision of medical services was breached by the first hospital because they didn't provide reasonable care. Now, there are times when things are picked up by the second opinion that are missed by the first, and sometimes that misdiagnosis is not the product of negligence. I mean, they're not perfect. They miss things. But if it's clearly something that should have been diagnosed on the front end and the care looks substandard, just take it up with the billing department and fight them tooth and nail. You know, they'll negotiate just about anything. You know, Chuck, everything's negotiable in life pretty much. They will negotiate with you on that bill, and you might end up getting it to where you're only paying half the bill if you lean on them really hard and point out to them where the service was defective.
Okay, good advice. Fran, thank you so much for calling in this evening. You know, there's another question I have. If, let's say there was a prescription mix-up, and so, you know, it obviously doesn't, you don't notice maybe a big change, or you're not noticing the problem for 1, 2, 3 months. Where does that kind of timeline begin?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. Nick's going to do a story on a case that I have involving a lady who was given the wrong prescription. She went to a pharmacy in Gallatin and was supposed to get a muscle relaxant, and instead was given antipsychotic medication. And when she opened up the pill bottle and took the pills, they were different looking. But you know, nowadays, Chuck, particularly when we take generics, they'll switch the pills on you.
Right.
And so you really have to rely on the pharmacist to make sure that the medication is correct. So she goes home and she takes her medication as prescribed, thinking she's taking muscle relaxers, and she starts hallucinating, getting sick, beginning to feel tingles and buzzes all over her body. Had to go to the emergency room, and it was there when they determined that she had been given the wrong medication. She would not have to give pre-suit notice until 1 year from the date she discovered that, in fact, the pills were wrong, not the date when she actually filled the prescription. But my concern for her and us in general when it comes to pharmacies is, you go into a pharmacy and you see how it's run. You know, when I talk about assembly line, they say they offer to counsel you and talk to you about the pills, but you know, a lot of us just don't have time to sit there and have a pharmacist go through all the you know, side effects and things of that nature. But one thing we do count on the pharmacist to do is give us the right pills.
Sure.
And so you have to ask, in a situation like that case I've got and other cases, where's the safety precautions? Why aren't they followed? I mean, it seems like a simple matter that you make sure you give the patient the right medicine. I mean, how hard can that be?
Right.
And it makes me wonder what's going on in some of these pharmacies, because this is not the only case I've had like that.
So the main thing is to just be diligent, obviously, and if you feel like something is wrong in that situation, if
your meds have switched in terms they look different, even though you take generics, go ahead and call. It's just, I've learned from her, because believe me, I take medicine too, and I've had them switch because I have a generic plan. Never gave a moment's thought until I started getting these cases that the pharmacist could potentially give me the wrong medication. So if you see your pill's been changed, just go to the pharmacy and say, hey, this isn't the same kind of pill I normally get. Is this the right medication?
Right. Good info. We are going to take a short break. We have folks on the line with us, and we will get to those calls right after this break. If you do have a question, we are running a little short on time this evening, so give us a call at 737-7587. We'll get to as many of those calls as we can after this break. So come on back to Open Line.